reason, war exploded across Europe. And seemingly without hesitation, this group of young men and women left their hometowns and their families to answer the call. At a time when their days should have been filled with innocence and baseball and love and cars and all the rest, instead their days were suddenly filled with fierce fighting on the land, on the sea, and in the air. They answered the call and turned the tide of war. Perhaps Franklin Roosevelt said it best when he declared, quote, "This generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny." That generation went on to win the war both in Europe and the Pacific. They returned home to start their lives over. They married, brought forth the baby boomer generation, and soon converted a wartime economy into the most powerful peacetime economy in the history of the world. They built houses and businesses. They fostered unparalleled breakthroughs in science and industry. And through it all, they stayed true to their values of personal responsibility, duty, honor, and faith. Jim Kassler was not only a part of that greatest generation, he was in many ways the living definition of the greatest generation. James Helms Kassler was born on May 2nd in 1926 in South Bend, Indiana, the second son of Rex and Inez Kassler's 3 children. His parents were typical Hoosiers in all the best sense of that. Solid, hardworking people who raised Jim and his 2 brothers in church and instilled in their children a deep love of country. Jim joined the United States Army Air Force in May 1944 after his high school graduation. He spent the next 2 years as a gunner in a B-29. Following the war, he came home and attended Butler University in Indianapolis, and then entered the United States Air Force pilot training program in January 1950 and received his wings on March 24, 1951 at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. And the rest, as they say, is history. His accomplishments and his valor have been well documented and recognized. In thinking about his passing and our gathering this afternoon, my mind went to a few lines from a letter written by St. Paul to a young friend named Timothy. When St. Paul wrote the letter, he was in prison, and he sensed the end was close. And so he wrote a series of letters. And towards the end of one of those letters, he wrote these lines, quote, "The time for my departure is near. I have fought a good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." St. Paul knew the end was near for him. The truth is, such a moment comes to every man and woman. As odd as it seems, death is very much a part of life. We can deny it, we can ignore it, but we cannot change it. So knowing this truth, Paul, looking back over his life, said, "I fought a good fight, I finished the race, I've kept the faith." Isn't that the same testimony we've heard from these reflections today? I fought the good fight. That phrase certainly expresses Colonel James Kassler's military career, but it goes beyond those years, building a business, raising a family, adjusting to the changes that come with life and aging and all of those things. But he never gave up, and he never gave in. In his autobiography, Tempered Steel, Colonel Kassler reflected on the difficult days of his imprisonment. We heard a portion of it in the video intro. He writes, "People have asked me how I endured imprisonment, especially the torture. I remember one night lying in the irons on the floor of the cell that we called the Ho Chi Minh Room. I was in great pain after a 3-day torture session with the Vietnamese. I knew they would be back, and I was very, very lonely. I wondered to myself, what is a 43-year-old man doing lying in this filthy hole, letting these animals beat the life out of him? I asked myself, If I do what they're asking me to do, would my family forgive me? Surely they would. They love me. How about God? Would he forgive me? Of course. He knows what I'm thinking right now, and yes, he would, for ours is a merciful God. Would my country forgive me? Certainly. No government in the world is more forgiving than ours. They would all forgive me because they would all know that I had done my best. Then why not end the suffering and the unending anxiety of waiting for them to come after you again? It was a tempting thought, but there was another party I hadn't thought about yet. Myself. One has to live with oneself, and as long as I possessed the strength and the mental faculties to resist, surrendering was out of the question. Nothing can destroy a person more completely than a loss of pride and honor. End quote. Jim Kassler fought a good fight. Passage also says, I finished the race. In just a few weeks at the end of the month, a green flag will drop at the Indianapolis Speedway, signaling the start of the world's most celebrated automobile race. When that happens, 33 gleaming, screaming, turbocharged cars will shoot around the fourth turn past the starting line at over 200 miles an hour. What a sight. On the pace lap and the first few racing laps, every car looks good and runs strong. However, people who follow Indy know that the goal is not to just start well, but to finish well. Give the race a little time, and as in past years, a toll will start to be taken. Engine failure, tire problems, host of other calamities will befall car after car after car until perhaps only half the cars that started actually make the finish line. The principle is this: it's not how you start, it's how you finish. I fought a good fight. I finished the race. I've kept the faith. I kept the faith. That's really the heart of the passage. That's the hinge on which the whole letter turns. Faith in God is to be understood as a personal faith and commitment. If we keep the faith will surely keep us in life's darkest hours. Everyone has some type of faith. We bank online. We sleep at night in houses filled with gas stoves and electric blankets. We have faith that our doctor knows what he or she is doing. We sit back on an airplane and read a book while we are being propelled through space at hundreds of miles an hour. We all have faith. Nonetheless, many people resist the idea of faith in a spiritual sense. I know that. Yet, not to believe is in itself an act of faith. Earlier this week, as I once more saw that footage of Colonel Kassler's return home and the family running to greet him in that moment, I couldn't help but think that just a few days ago, he made another trip home, a final trip home, free once again, forever free after a long and difficult battle. It had not been a good year for Douglas MacArthur. After almost losing a war in Korea that he seemed had already been won, he was relieved of command by President Truman, making headlines all around the world. But for 37 minutes on April 19, 1951, General MacArthur held America in the palm of his hand. His address before a joint session of Congress, one of the great moments in the early history of television, offered him a unique opportunity to tell his side of the story. In the early part of the speech, he carefully laid out his opinion about our Asian policy. But what was remembered was not the early part of the speech. What's been remembered across the years is his closing to that speech. He said, "I've just left our fighting sons in Korea. They have met all tests there, and I can report to you without reservation that they are splendid in every way. Those gallant men will remain often in my thoughts and in my prayers, always. I'm closing my 52 years of military service. When I joined the Army before the turn of the century, it was the fulfillment of all my boyish hopes and dreams. The world has turned over many times since then, but I remember the refrain of one of the most popular barracks ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die, they just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, he went on to say, I now close my military career and fade away, an old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him light to see that duty. It was a memorable speech and an enduring closing line. Old soldiers never die, they just fade away. But with all due respect, I take exception to the line. Old soldiers do die, and we have to say goodbye. But even though they die, not all old soldiers fade away. Not Jim Kessler. His memory will not fade from our memory. He will live on in the hearts and minds of his precious family. He will live on in this community who knew him and loved him. And he will live on in the enduring story of a great nation, a country he loved and served so very well. May God bless his memory to us all.
Have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His days marching on. He has sounded forth a trumpet that shall never retreat. He's sifting out the hearts of men before the judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant. sentiment